Good afternoon. Welcome to the University of Manitoba Alumni and Friends Virtual Learning for Life series. This is the start of our fall 2020 session. My name is Tracy Bowman. I'm the Director of Alumni Relations and also a proud alumna, and I will be the moderator for today's series. Thank you for joining us and making this event part of your day, and in general for choosing to stay connected with your alma mater. We are able to offer this program free of charge to all of our 148,000 alumni living in 148 countries around the world, thanks to the very generous sponsorship of U of M's affinity partner, IA Financial. Thank you to them. Delivering learning for life opportunities is a very important role for the U of M, and we're proud to be able to showcase so many of our leading professors and researchers in this way. Now, just a few housekeeping details before we get started. If you attended the spring session, you will know all of this already. You are obviously all viewing this on a YouTube link, and that will be available to you in about a day or two to check on it later if you'd like to on our website. And also, in order to ask questions of our presenter, we are again using the website called Slido. So that is www.sli.do, and the password is 7503. And there you can type in your question. Really, throughout the presentation, I will be asking them at the end, and we will try to get through as many as we can. So now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Leisha Strachan, who will be presenting on Challenges Are Made for the Winner, Exploring Positive Youth Development Through Sport. So before we turn it to her, I just want to share a little bit about her background. She is a two-time UM alumna, and she's also a professor in the Faculty of Kinesiology and Recreation Management, we often call KinRec. Her research interests focus on positive youth development in sport. Specifically, she's interested in examining the experiences and various outcomes of children and youth in recreational to high-performance sport programs. She's currently working on 2 SSHRC-funded projects, a project that will spread the work about positive youth development through sport around the country, and secondly, exploring cultural relevancy with Indigenous youth regarding positive youth development through sport. And with that, over to you, Dr. Strachan.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I am so excited to be here today, and I really appreciate the Alumni Association thinking of me and giving me this opportunity. I'm a very proud alumni of this university and feel extremely blessed to be back and having my academic career here. So I'm really excited to share with you just some thoughts about the field of positive youth development through sport and some of the work that I've been pursuing lately. So as a first-generation Black Canadian here with parents who immigrated from the small island of Grenada about 52 years ago, I am always grateful to be on this land, which is Treaty 1 land belonging to the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of Métis Nation here in Manitoba. I look forward to moving forward with Indigenous communities in a spirit of peace and reconciliation. So I always like to start when I think about my own journey through sport. I have a background in sport myself. I was very fortunate to be involved in the sport of baton twirling for 18 years and was still pursuing sort of my national team status as I was going through my studies at the university. And I really believe this is where my research journey started. I'm a 7-time national team member and a 2-time world medalist in the sport. And these experiences I had and the coaches who I encountered through my experiences really laid the foundation for me to be curious about the field of sports psychology, even at a young age. And probably, you know, this curiosity is probably the reason why I left the job as a physical educator to pursue graduate work and graduate work in this field. So as I was going through my sport experience, I had this quote that my dad used to tell me before I went to competitions. And he pretty much told me this quote, I want to say from the time I was at least 9 until the end of my career. And he would always, when I was leaving the door, he'd always say, you know, have fun and remember that challenges are made for the winner. And of course, when I was younger, I'm not really thinking about what this means. It just sounded like a weird quote to me at the time, but it really is something that has stayed in my head. You know, this idea that it'll take adversity to become a winner, and that it takes a lot of persistence in order to get to those upper echelons of sport. So this is something that stayed in my head, and I wanted to use this sort of as a dedication to my parents, but also thinking of how I can frame it and how it's sort of still stayed with me even through my career as a researcher. This is one quote that I do sometimes like to start talks with. This is from 2016, and it was a tweet or an article that came out after the World Junior hockey team at the time had placed 6th in the World Championship tournament. And of course, the country was in upheaval, didn't know what to do with themselves with these young men who didn't perform the way that we would expect sort of young hockey players at that level to perform. And the author at that time said this quote in the article, that maybe we've lost sight of the forest for the trees, letting hockey become an industry. We should remember it's a game, and let kids play and learn through play. Sorry, let kids play and learn through play. And the author, who's Grant Gordon, continues by saying, bringing back some freedom into minor hockey, returning a sense of play to the game, will help develop creative skills and in turn, help us to win. So I found this article very interesting because it does, again, talk about this tension that we have in recent years, for sure, in the professionalization of youth sport, and really challenging us to think about what is youth sport and what do we expect from youth sport, and what are the outcomes that we want kids and youth to get from sport. Is it really all about performance? And if it's not all about performance, then how do we structure and engineer sport so that it can be delivered in a more positive way that does let kids develop those creativity skills, as well as letting them play and learn through sport, even at the high levels. So when I think about the challenges first, of course, I right away go to thinking about research and where I started my own research. And so I started my master's work at the time at the University of Windsor, under the direction of Krista Monroe Chandler, who's still there at the University of Windsor. And this was a study that was done actually with baton participants, and was looking at imagery. And particularly my master's thesis looked at how we use imagery to predict self-confidence in young high-performance athletes, or in young elite athletes. And I'm not going to dwell on this, but just some of the results pointed to this idea that there are possible developmental differences related to imagery use, and highlighted the importance of imagery for young athletes. But what really stuck with me was this idea of confidence, and how the athletes, all from the ages of 7 all the way to 12, they spoke about the importance of confidence and how important that is. And so this really drove me to then start looking more into this field of youth development through sport. So participation in sport, from many of the work out there, does talk about the importance of physical, psychological, and social benefits for children. And also it's important to take an ecological approach. So not just looking at the individual in the middle of the wheel, as you can see on the right side, but also looking at all the systems around the individual. So looking at the microsystems, so how the family, coaches, peers, how they influence that individual, and going all the way out to the macro system. So how we structure society, and looking at culture as well, and how that might have an influence on sport development or participation. So this led me to the field of positive youth development. So one definition is the growth of various competencies that can help a young person in sport, life, and in their future. And the field of positive youth development really points to this idea of youth being resources to be developed rather than problems to be solved. So it's an asset building approach, building the skills, helping them with coping skills, helping them with taking initiative, and all those positive skills that we want from sport, versus a deficit reduction approach, instead of thinking about squashing the negative behaviors and just focusing on those, thinking of all the positive skills that can be developed. So it also pointed to the literature, pointed to the importance of structured programs for youth to promote positive development, and not just only sport, but also looking at other structured programs such as music lessons and art lessons. The study also looked at scouts and service activities and how those are influential in terms of youth development. What's important is that a lot of North American youth spend a lot of time invested in sport. And we can argue and think about the different points in terms of investment, but a lot of youth are involved in structured sport programs. And so, and what was interesting is this study that came out from New Holland in 2008. It was a report actually through Sport Canada that spoke to this idea that parents and many others view sport as a strong context for positive development. And so many believe that sport has that strength to actually be that context that can really help with the development of those positive skills. So it can lead to both positive and negative developmental outcomes, some of those positive ones being positive peer relationships, as well as thinking about how to handle emotion, but some negative ones as well, which can come with negative interactions with coaches, as well as parental pressure that can also come about through sport participation. So my guiding question, and it still is in my research, just really overarching, is how can sport programs be structured to ensure the delivery of these positive outcomes? So this then led to a series of studies that I did in my doctoral work, looking at different factors that might influence participation, understanding a little bit about enjoyment and burnout and those relationships to the development of positive skills. I also had a chance to look at the difference between specializers, so those who are really highly invested in sport. And in my study, it was a group of highly invested swimmers as well as gymnasts. And also versus samplers, so samplers, those who are involved in a lot of different sports, but still quite invested in a lot of different sports, and then comparing those experiences and outcomes. And at the time, I was thinking there would be like lots of different things to look at in terms of their differences. But what we really found was that even though they're invested at these high levels and went through a lot of the different experiences and different trajectories, that the experiences were often pretty similar in terms of what they were involved in. And one thing that really stood out to me still is with the specializers, they spoke a lot about this idea of being involved with diverse peer groups. And when they have that intensity of training and they're around different peers of different ages, that they have opportunities to interact that way instead of a particular age grouping. So that was one thing. The other last study that I was able to do in my doctoral work was looking at coaching. And that last sort of article at the bottom, that's a new view exploring positive youth development in elite sport contexts. And this was an interview or series of interviews and observations with coaches from that specializer category, for those who are super invested and just understanding a little bit more about their thoughts on positive development and how they are actually giving positive experiences within their sport programs. Because from the data and the outcomes that I had from the specializers, a lot of it was quite positive. So what are they doing and what are those actions that they were doing? So here are just some general outcomes, general, I guess, results and discussions that came from that doctoral research. So sort of 4 main points. So first of all, that sport, whether it be recreational or high performance sport, can play a key role in promoting positive youth development and also encourage this idea of transfer into other life settings. If you wanted to look even more into the transfer literature, there's quite a bit now out there, some great work being done by Corliss Bean, a Canadian researcher, really looking at transfer and how we learn those life skills and how they're transferred into other contexts. Another main outcome, main result, was the importance of supportive and empowering environments, and that those should be promoted within sport programs. This was a quote that I came across a couple of years ago, just online. I think it was something that my former advisor, Dr. Jean Cote at Queen's University, had shared in a Twitter post, I think, and it just stayed with me, realizing that adults are the problem with youth athletics, not the kids. And the only way to reverse that is to really then trust the kids and be more willing to empower their environment and give them some leeway to make choices within their sport experience. Another main result was pointing to adults and peers and how they play an important and critical role in youth sport programs. So providing opportunities for personal and social development, as well as supportive interactions, which are sort of two key areas in setting features for positive programs. And the last key result was the integration of family, school, and communities, and that all of these are important pieces for promoting developmental redundancy. So what they're learning in sport and what they're learning in school and what they're learning in their families all need to be on the same page and need to be reinforced in all those contexts in order for positive development to occur. As I continued on after my doctoral work, this one study was shared with me from my former advisor, actually, and it's something that I continue to go back to. And it was a study done by Dr. Visick and colleagues at George Washington University. And she has developed this fun integrated theory, which discusses how fun what is fun, I guess, in youth sport. So we know one of the main reasons why kids participate in sport is to have fun. And she found that really intriguing in terms of thinking of, well, what is fun? Like, what does that actually look like? And what are those key and critical actions that are important in terms of promoting fun and enjoyment in sport? So after a series of analyses, some quite complex analyses with soccer players as the general population that she used, she kind of found three main areas that were important for enjoyment. That's that golden triangle in the middle there. So starting from the top, being a good sport, trying hard, and then positive coaching. So again, based on my results from my doctoral thesis, the importance of the coaching angle and coaches, and particularly when I did that one study when I just looked at the coaches, reinforcing this idea of the importance of the role of the coach in promoting positive development and promoting fun. So I just wanted to share these specific behaviors that she discussed in her paper. So I'll just quickly rattle them off. So if you're a coach, you can think and reflect on whether you do this, or if you're a parent, thinking about if my child talks about this in terms of their sport experience. So when a coach treats players with respect, when a coach encourages the team, having a coach who is a positive role model, getting clear and consistent communication from coaches, a coach who knows a lot about the sport, a coach who allows mistakes while staying positive, a coach who listens to players and takes their opinions into consideration, a coach who you can talk to easily, a nice and friendly coach, getting compliments from coaches, when a coach participates with players during practice, and lastly, when a coach jokes around. So what really stood out to me when I look at this list is that only really one of them talks about knowledge of the sport or tactical knowledge of the sport. So, and of course, that is important in youth sport. We want knowledgeable coaches. But what's really clear is that all the other ones are, we would say, quote unquote, soft skills. Those skills that are sometimes hard to teach. The idea of being friendly and open to your players, giving compliments, being a positive role model, encouraging. And I really like that those specific actions really point to this idea. A lot of the things in the positive youth development literature point to this idea of building some of those soft skills. And some coaches are very natural at doing that, and others might need training, just like you might need training in terms of the drills and learning about the physical aspects of the sport. More, I think, attention needs to be paid as well to how we teach coaches about the soft skills that are needed in terms of the art of coaching. So this is one framework that's recently come about, and it's been kind of a way for me to ground my own research, is the personal assets framework. And what's interesting about this framework is that it kind of gives us this idea of an ecological approach in a different way, but also looking at how things develop over time and the importance of time in terms of that it takes time to develop these. It's not something that can happen really quickly. So it starts on the left side with these 3 gears: the importance of personal engagement in activities, quality relationships, and appropriate settings. And those 3, I really like how they show that they're gears in it, because they all are intertwined, but they all need to work together in order to work. Moving then to the next thing, which are the 4 C's. And these are the personal assets that are important to develop in youth. So developing competence, developing confidence, connection, and character. And then finally, leading to the overarching kind of main outcomes from youth sport participation, which are the 3 P's: participation, performance, as well as personal development. So we often, I'm saying we because I also coach, but coaches often thinking about performance and participation quite a bit, but not really focusing a lot more and thinking about the personal development aspect, which then goes back to how are we developing these 4 C's and what are we doing to have a more deliberate and intentional approach. This is in line with current research, which proposes that both implicit processes and explicit processes are possible to develop in positive youth development programming. And then I'm going to talk about a project that I've been working on for the last few years called Project SCORE, and how this really helps in terms of the explicit nature of delivering life skill programs to young people. One quote that has always stayed with me, and I saw this quote in a book just when I was starting my doctoral work from Benson, and it was just simple, but this idea of skills are taught, not caught. You know, we have to actually be intentional about teaching skills and not just expecting that youth or children are gonna just catch what we're throwing at them. We really have to think about the intentionality piece of it as well. So as I mentioned, Project SCORE has been a project that I've been really invested in for the last few years. And feel free, I'm not gonna go over the whole resource, but feel free to check it out at projectscore.ca. But I will just give you a little bit of background. So this was a SSHRC-funded project that we got funding for in 2012, and then updated with an internal University of Manitoba grant in 2016. And our tagline for Project SCORE has been Uniting Sport and Life. So it is a free resource to help coaches and parents as well. So we know that parents are an important part of that system that we think about when we think about the ecological theory. So parents as well, how we're integrating the research from positive youth development in sport and into their sport coaching practices. So it really takes the 4 C's, that's what the focus is on. It takes each C and breaks down each C into actions that coaches can do in their programs in order to promote positive development. It's also been translated into 3 languages, so it is available in English, French, as well as Portuguese. And I'll explain that a little bit later. And we do have an endorsement from True Sport, which is really great. And I'm really hoping that I can do more work with them, as well as the Coaching Association Manitoba has added the resource to their newer modules that they're doing. One is the planning a practice one, and the other one is making ethical decisions. So it's neat to be able to see that resource available for coaches as well. So we have published a little bit of work on this particular resource. We've looked at coaches' perceptions of using Project SCORE and how they've promoted it and used it within their sport programs. And this is a smaller paper, really hoping to keep expanding the research here. But the smaller paper has sort of given us a little bit of a window into what coaches are thinking And what was really encouraging was that coaches did talk about using the resource and had a really positive experience using it. But not only did they find that it helped them in terms of interacting with their athletes, but it also helped them personally in terms of their own development and the importance of reflection, and for coaches to think about more intentionally what they're doing. Some of the coaches were quite natural and were actually doing a lot of the things that we mentioned in Project SCORE already. But again, this idea of intentionality and then taking a step back and thinking about what I'm doing, and that, yeah, I'm on the right track when I'm doing this action, or maybe I need to tweak a little bit of something here in order to make that a little more positive. Recently, we've actually had a chance ourselves to do some reflecting and thinking about Project SCORE, understanding a little bit more about the lessons learned from the resource and future pathways. I'm happy to pass on this paper to anyone who might be interested. But along with Dr. Santos, who is a researcher in Portugal, in Porto, as well as Dr. Danny McDonald, who's at the University of Prince Edward Island, and who has been involved, again, in Project SCORE right from the start. And Dr. Santos has been using Project SCORE quite a bit in the Portuguese context. So it was really neat to sort of think about all the challenges and opportunities for future research and future pathways dealing with Project SCORE, and what we can do to even make it better and encourage more reach. Interestingly, one of the points that we mentioned was coaching education and online coaching education, and how there's definitely a lot of pedagogy around that in terms of online, but this was sort of before everything has happened with the pandemic, or we were actually submitting it sort of in the middle, just as we were starting sort of in April. So it was really interesting to then reflect on this idea of online coaching education and how we can make that better, and what are some things that we need to do in order to make it, I guess, more meaningful for coaches. I've kind of talked about, how I might be winning now, thinking about for the winner when we think about Project SCORE. And one thing that I've been really proud of as well is thinking again about this idea of transfer of skill. And although we're still collecting data and it's been on hold a little bit, this GIFT project, this is a project that I've been engaged with a PhD candidate who's in peace and conflict studies, so Michelle Lemonius. And we've been engaged in a project that she kind of pulled me into, which is great, called the GIFT Project, which is called the Girls Incredible Football Team in Jamaica. And we've been able to go down there a few times, engage with a community there that is a low-income community, looking for programming for girls in particular, and looking at how we're empowering girls in Jamaica in their experience. Michelle's research is really focused on understanding a little bit more about sexual violence in the Jamaican context. And her idea of the side project was thinking about the power of sport in terms of training the coaches in Project SCORE to help the coaches, help the athletes grow and build those positive skills in terms of the 4 C's. And at the same time, she's doing an educational component with the parents, where they're bringing in people from the community who are involved in those types of agencies and police, and having discussions with parents about what's happening in their community. So kind of trying to get it from both sides. Again, this idea of the importance of parents being involved. And that project is ongoing. Of course, it's been on hold with COVID, but we're hoping really to get back to it as soon as we can. And then Fernando, Dr. Santos has been really a great promoter of Project SCORE in Portugal. And this is one paper that he had led, looking at how Project SCORE is used in a physical education context. Again, going back to my roots as a physical educator, and seeing how this particular teacher was using it with a group of students, and really found a lot of the same outcomes that we did when we were looking particularly with coaches in the sport environment. I did mention as well the importance of parents and just the importance of parents in the youth sport context. And so on Project SCORE, we don't only have the coaches' locker room that unpacks the 4 C's, We also have what we call a parents' lounge on the site as well that have the 4 C's structured as well, but again, attacking the 4 C's from actions that parents can do and how parents can be helpful to their children, and supporting, again, this idea of developmental redundancy, trying to teach in the family sort of the same 4 C's, the same outcomes that are being talked about in the sport context with the coach. Still need to do some research on that, so we're working on that. The other part of the youth development literature that I've been very proud to be a part of is a SSHRC-funded grant that has actually recently been completed, looking at positive development through sport through the voices of Indigenous youth. And this was done in collaboration with Dr. Tara-Lee McHugh at the University of Alberta and Dr. Courtney Mason at Thompson Rivers University, and engaging youth in those 3 locales to be part of sharing circles, talking about their experiences, and then using sort of the C's as a platform to talk about what does positive youth development mean to Indigenous youth, so that we can also help provide more culturally relevant programming as well when we think about youth sport. So I do want to share with you a video from one of the participants. Actually bravely agreed to be part of a video. So I'm just going to show you a very short clip from that in terms of, instead of speaking for the youth, I think it's more powerful to hear it from her voice and her perspective.
The most important C to develop is connection. Apart from hockey, there really isn't many Indigenous role models to look up to, which prohibits a lot of Indigenous youth from becoming involved or being able to see themselves in that place of participating in sports. I think connection really is connected to all of the other C's as well. I think what can be done to make it more meaningful to urban Indigenous youth is, of course, accessibility, but also incorporating people from their community that they can relate to, as well as Indigenous cultures and traditions, and maybe doing traditional games or incorporating like traditional teachings within that.
So there's no other better way of saying that and kind of giving a good snapshot of some of the things we were able to learn from those youth in that project. And Jordan was one of the ones who was very outspoken, and which was great, and was willing to share some of her perspective. Another thing that Tracy had mentioned in the intro is this project. Again, I think this particular project, we're sort of at the end of the life cycle of this particular project, but there is a legacy that has been left from it in terms of PYD Sport NET. So if you are on Twitter, please give a follow to PYD Sport NET. On there, you'll find a bunch of free resources and infographics, kind of breaking down some of the research in very easy sort of ways to get out to the community. And it's research looking at coaching, as well as parents, as well as how we set up the sport environment, looking at provincial sport organizations and their role in promoting positive development. So please take a look at that and use any of those resources with any sport groups that you're in terms of, again, thinking of how we can develop more evidence-based ways of thinking about building positive youth. So this is a picture of myself and a few of my athletes from the last International Cup, which feels like a long time ago that we traveled, but this was from a summer of 2019 in France, and we're an International Cup competition. And these are things, when I think about how we take the research and then also apply it, and and not just in research and thinking about what I'm going to do with research, but just also how it relates to what I do in my life. And it always sort of, again, full circle, it comes back to the baton twirl. But this idea that I've been involved as a coach now for 26 years. I have a club here in the city and have been very invested in our sport as a coach and a judge. So I know that a lot of the things I've spoken to you about today have really had an impact on who I am as a coach. I know that even when I study this area of positive youth development, it really has had a big influence, my own research and the research done by other incredible colleagues around the nation, really reading their research and thinking about how I can implement some of these things into my coaching practice really has been a big joy for me. And finally, when we think of transfer of skill, another thing that I'm involved with as well is this Anansi School for the Performing Arts, which we started 12 years ago. And it's a group teaching Caribbean African culture through the arts. Again, another big full circle moment for me here. But not just thinking about how it can apply to sport, but we've also used some of that PYD and sport literature to inform the things that we do within Anansi as well. So I think, again, it's important to think about it really holistically and very globally as well, and thinking about how we can use all of this information in the most positive way that we can. So as I wrap up, moving forward and thinking again about this, challenges are made for the winner, and that we continue to have lots of challenges in this area in youth sport. There's so many questions that need to be answered, and they're difficult questions, and sometimes it's really difficult to do this type of work, trying to think about how sport can really change. And we've had to think about changing in a lot of different ways, particularly over the last 6 months. So how do we really think about then of how that applies to youth sport programming and taking a risk? And it might mean that some things look different. But moving forward, recently, actually, just in June, found out that we were awarded a SSHRC Sport Canada grant for an evaluation project of Project SCORE that we're really hoping to start in January 2021. So if there's anybody who's a coach out there, I'm going to try a little bit of recruiting right now, but we're really hoping that we can get some teams and really looking at some of those 4 C's outcomes with youth, and then doing Project SCORE workshops with coaches and parents, and doing sort of a pre-post intervention situation as we are moving forward to learn more about what youth actually need. I would also, moving forward, like to continue this work with Indigenous communities. It's now been a couple of years, and I'm looking forward to reopening some dialogue with Indigenous communities and people who are involved in Indigenous communities, particularly in sport programs, and going off the work as well that my PhD student, Nick Kosmenko, is doing, looking at First Nations youth and their coming to the city and their experiences in terms of engagement in sport participation. So, and Indigenous coaches as well. So we really like to still continue doing that work. And lastly, Dr. Martin Cameray, who's at the University of Ottawa, and colleagues, and I'm included in that group. We're looking to submit a SSHRC grant application looking at positive youth development and its connections to social justice, and understanding a little bit more about what sport programs, what are the responsibilities of coaches in terms of promoting social justice in their sport programs as well. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. I went a little bit longer, I think, than I wanted to, but hopefully that's okay. And I just want to acknowledge SSHRC and Sport Canada through the Sport Participation Research Initiative for their support of my research throughout the last, for sure 12 years or so that I've been involved as a researcher and in a position post-graduation. Also the University of Manitoba for their continued support, and I should have added in there as well my specific faculty for the support that they've given me, as well as Dr. McDonald and Dr. Cote, who have been in Project SCORE right from the beginning, and as well as Dr. Fernando Santos in Porto, who's also been instrumental in really pushing this idea of youth development in the context that he's in. And it's been really inspiring to watch that as well. So thank you, everyone, Miigwech, and I look forward to your questions. And thanks so much for coming today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Strachan. That was really interesting and very engaging. We do have some questions that have come through, and I do also have my own. To it as a mom of two boys who play hockey, I was thinking of a lot of things as you were speaking. So I'm going to go to some of our participant questions first. So the first one is, what needs to be included in sport programming to more positively position the experience for girls?
Oh, okay. Specifically for girls, I know there's a lot of organizations, a few organizations out there that have really been focusing on sport experience for girls in particular. And I know, again, the context that we work with for the project in Jamaica has been primarily focused on girls. And one thing that we've been really focusing on a lot is this idea of empowerment, having opportunities for them to use their voices even more. And when we think about what we can do in sport, we can definitely encourage and develop leaders in sport. And that's actually one of the things that we have in Project SCORE, one of the SCORE plays that we use for coaches and for parents. One of them has to do with developing leaders and how does that look like in sport. And, it might look really simple at first, giving athletes a little bit of responsibility, but even that little bit of responsibility can have a lot of meaning. And I think that when we think about girls and developing confidence and developing those 4 C's, that idea of empowerment and leadership is something that I think is really key.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next one is our grandson at age 7 has a real passion for the game of soccer. Do you have any advice about how to keep him grounded and not arrogant as he moves forward?
That's a great question. I have a 9-year-old nephew who's also extremely passionate about soccer. And I, have gone to see games, and I think it's interesting that as my research has evolved as well, and watching him grow up from playing Timbit soccer to this year watching him play soccer as a 9-year-old, we really had to, or not we, but I've really been trying to, or noticed, or trying to talk to him a little bit more about humility, and the importance of teaching empathy. And again, sport just provides some of that real life context for teaching that. And for him, I think it's now been flipped, this idea that, he's had to have a little bit of adversity this year. So thinking about, again, how to push through and persevere. But I think when we think about, that overconfidence or cockiness, I think at 7, they're still so young. They're still so young. We just want to allow them to just play and have fun. If they have a little bit of bravado at 7, it's okay. But again, having those conversations, being deliberate in conversations about empathy and understanding, what it means for other players on his team and how other players on his team might feel, and, sort of having those types of conversations might be also really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Some sports are not necessarily designed to have that or draw that empathy gene from you, right? Like hockey, for example, right? Which is the whole nature of it is, no, that's my puck, right? Trying to go after the other one. And so that's interesting what you say.
Yeah. But at the same time, there's still lots of opportunities to build that in hockey. Yes, it's your puck, but you can't be the only one scoring all the time. It does have to be passed around. And so, I remember, even as you're saying that, I was, my nephew really wanted to score this year, and he didn't get a chance to score, and he's usually used to scoring a lot. Mm-hmm. So he didn't get a chance to score this year in soccer. And his coach came over, he was upset because the last game ended and he feel like he didn't contribute, but he did, help a lot with, help in terms of passing the ball and doing things. And his coach came up to him and said, a goal is 1 point, but like an assist is 2. you know, and that's for me as a coach. And so that's so valuable. And, you know, even though he might have rolled his eyes at first, like, I know what it is. You know, I think he really did like remember that, you know, and again, as coaches, we can just plant that seed. But I thought, oh, that was so great to hear that. And he said that in front of his parents, you know, and I really sort of appreciated that as well. So we can develop that, particularly as they grow and develop through the sport.
No, good advice, that's for sure. Okay, so the next question is, when measuring social development outcomes such as improved health, how do you make sure that the outcomes of the project are directly linked to the project objectives? And are they specific, concrete, measurable, you know, qualitative versus quantitative?
Yeah, so most of the research I've done, particularly with coaches, has been qualitative. But we don't have specific, I would say, health outcomes specifically that have to do with the research that we've been doing, in particular for this new project moving forward. We are doing some measures, but mostly based on around the C's. So looking at just how they're developing those positive skills within practice and within games and what they're doing in their experience. But, you know, when we look at the Canadian Sport for Life model, we do know that, of course, being healthy for life is a big part of that model. And so, those health outcomes, again, it's another question to think about, are going to be important to measure at some point as well. But I think as well, if we can think about developing these 4 C's, knowing that will also help in terms of sport participation and just maintaining being active for life and building those skills, I think that will then, you know, have a sort of a natural equation to building health and healthy outcomes.
Okay, thank you. So another one comes from a coach. This person's asking, if a coach wants to be involved in your studies, how do we get in touch with you? How do they get involved? Perfect.
There's my email is there on that last slide. Please feel free to send me an email and let me know. Again, this particular project is not going to be getting started until the funding comes through, which is not till January, at least when we start sort of recruiting and getting things in place. But it will entail a workshop with Project SCORE, probably virtually, but doing a workshop, as well as then having coaches then go and deliver the program. And then again, doing a sort of a follow-up with coaches more qualitatively about delivering it. So yeah, so please, that's awesome. I would love to have as many coaches as we can, and there will be coaches. This project is going to be across Canada, so we're going to have venues in PI as well as Ontario and as well as here.
And is that in all sports?
Right now, we're looking at team sports. Yeah, any team sport right now.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Another question we have, and I encourage everybody to go to slido. SLI.do, and then 7503 is the password. So the next question we have is, how do we as parents and grandparents encourage the child with less natural athletic ability to maintain participation in sports given the positive outcomes?
Yes, that's an excellent question. Again, I think we've had such a focus on performance, and we put so much on kids in terms of being able to perform, knowing that sometimes some kids progress later, like kids don't have the exact same trajectory through sport. So I think it's, and I come across that as a coach sometimes. You know, I've been coaching a long time. Of course, you come across some athletes who are extremely talented. You've come through some athletes who love the sport, maybe aren't as physically talented, but definitely have the heart to participate. And those are the ones that persist. And, you know, in terms of, again, it's hard to tell as an athlete or as a young athlete where they're going to be. So it's just encouraging them in that experience, encouraging them to find more out of just winning in terms of wins and losses, but thinking of different ways that they can win in sport. And that might also come in terms of keeping track of their own development, keeping track of their own benchmarks, their own, you know, not in terms of comparing to anybody else, but focusing on that autonomous development and really focusing on that. And I think that can be really powerful for kids, and parents can have a lot of say in helping them with that.
Yeah, no, definitely good advice. So we have time for my questions. So I encourage everyone who's still listening, please do ask some questions. We still have some more time with Dr. Strachan. So my question is, so I mean, as I said, I've got two boys that are in hockey. They're not elite hockey. They're 10 and 12, but you know, you never know what the future might hold. But so hockey is what we know mostly. But do you find, are there differences by sport? For example, do you see some sports or coaches, just the very nature of the sport and the coaches that are there in terms of the 4Cs and what they're doing to promote things that you're saying, or some sports better than others?
Yes, that's a really great question. We haven't actually, even through other studies, haven't really seen a lot of difference between sports. I think it does, again, come down to coaching and how the coach is actually delivering those deliberate experiences in sports. So there's a lot of pressure and expectation on coaches, you know, and I think it's as I mentioned, it's an art, and it takes a lot of skill development and work to help to sort of develop those. But in terms of differences between sports, not really. Anecdotally, just through my own research, I've worked with team sports versus individual sports. So in terms of that kind of sport, and again, when even at an individual sport, if we're thinking of track or swimming or gymnastics, they still train in groups quite a bit. So even though they're not competing necessarily as a team, there's still a team culture that's developed quite a bit. So, so we really haven't even seen a lot of differences between the individual and the team sports. There's some research to suggest that in some of the individual sports, there might be a stronger bond between coaches because they sort of have those more individual relationships with athletes, but it's very negligible. So, so it really doesn't matter right now which sport. We haven't really seen that too much in the literature.
Mm-hmm. And what about the different levels? So I mean, which is that my kids are dealing with, their volunteers, they're just their dads for the team, right? Versus some of the the elite sports where they're paid coaches, right? And one would expect that they have more experience. They've taken their various different coaching certification. I mean, are you seeing differences there at all?
Yes, yeah. I think there are. Again, I need to delve a little bit deeper into it, but I think there are some differences in terms of the level of coach, but I think there's still a responsibility then to focus. We know to focus on the positive skills. So, my former advisor, Dr. Jacques Cote, has a couple of papers out looking at sort of different participation coaches for young people, participation coaches for adults, looking at performance coaches for young people and performance coaches for adults, and really trying to talk about what those actions are and how those roles are different in sport. So, there is a different responsibility for a recreational community club coach than there is for a high performance paid coach. But even at those levels, even at the high level, I still think it's really important to focus even more at those high levels on those positive skills, because they're spending so much time in that context, and time is a really important factor in terms of development. So if they're spending a lot of time and it's not a great environment, then you could have some negative outcomes that happen. So for those participation coaches that might just see kids once or twice a week in a program, they don't have as much time, so they might need sort of more years. You might stay with that team for a few years and then see kids grow and help develop those. But there's still a responsibility, no matter what level, to really think about the development of those Cs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, and another question has come in on Slido, and that is, how would you incorporate PYD with newcomer youth/children when planning programming geared towards that target group?
Yeah, that's great. So when we think of newcomer youth, we know that's a very the population of newcomers in Canada is growing exponentially. And so we do have to think about how we're engaging newcomer youth in sport programs. And I think similar to Indigenous athletes, we do have to think about the context that we're delivering. And it's important that we talk to them and understand more about their experience first before delivering programs. And that those 4 Cs might look different. They might mean something different to newcomer youth. Of course, they're still the same C's. We still want to develop confidence and competence, of course, and connection and character. We want to develop those, but it might look different than, you know, what we are used to in a Western society. You know, it might, those might mean different things for those children. So I think it's talking to the kids, understanding what's important for them in youth sport, in youth programs, and still thinking about those C's, but in a little different way.
Wonderful. Super. Well, those are all the questions that have come through. So thank you very much, Dr. Strachan, for that great presentation. And we really appreciate answering all the questions. Thank you to everybody who attended and who listened. As I said, we will be sending you, the link will be available on our website, and we'll send you a link to it if you'd like to view this again. We're also going to send you a survey, which we hope you can just share your thoughts and feedback. It will only take you a few minutes to fill out. We do encourage you to respond, as it's the only way that we're able to improve. So if you haven't registered for next week, we encourage you to do that. We will hear from Dr. Kel Anderson in the Faculty of Law. He is the director of the Masters in Human Rights program, which is a very new and innovative program we have here at the U of M. And he will be speaking about the program, as well as about his research for a book he's currently writing on the dilemma of Dominic Ongwen, a former child soldier on the trial at the International Criminal Court. So thank you again for spending the last hour with us, and we hope to see you next week.
Thanks so much. Thank you.